Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for webinar 1 of our Carbon Farming Outreach Program webinar series. Today's webinar is going to be focusing on an introduction to carbon farming, but in the coming weeks we'll be releasing webinars that cover a range of topics. Overall there's going to be 8 or 9 webinars, with them being released approximately every 2 weeks. And you can find more information on our website under the Carbon on Country heading. There's just a little disclaimer before we start that the information contained in this presentation remains the property of ABC Foundation and may only be used for internal purposes, and the content within this presentation is deemed accurate for the purpose of promoting carbon farming and land management practices. Discussions of the ACCU scheme and financial benefits of carbon farming are general in nature, and attendees should seek independent advice for their specific circumstances. Access and use of any of the information contained in this presentation may only occur with written consent of the ABC Foundation CEO. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people whose country I'm on today, and ABC Foundation also would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the past, present and future elders and traditional owners of this country and throughout Australia, and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. And we celebrate the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So these are our learning objectives for today's webinar. So objective number 1, we're going to understand what carbon farming is and how it differs from other land management approaches. Number 2, recognise how carbon moves through natural systems and how land management influences carbon storage. Number 3, understand the role that carbon farming can play in responding to climate change. Number 4, identify different types of carbon farming activities across different landscapes. Number 5, recognise the opportunities, limits and responsibilities involved with undertaking a carbon farming project. And number 6, just feel more confident engaging in informed discussions and decisions around carbon farming on country. So why are we even talking about carbon farming? Well, one of the big reasons is obviously climate change. And current climate trends show that warmer conditions and shifting rainfall are coming, with projections pointing to continued change into the future. And some of those future predictions for WA by the year 2050 are an increase in temperatures by about 1 to 2.5 degrees Celsius, the number of days over 40 degrees Celsius tripling in a given year, a 40% increase in the number of high fire danger days, and a decrease in rainfall. And this has just been sourced from the Western Australian Climate Projections Summary document. These trends highlight the importance of carbon farming as a practical way to reduce our emissions and improve the resilience of our landscapes. And it's important to note that these are long-term shifts and can take decades to centuries to see change. And this shows the importance of proactive long-term land management. And land and ecosystems, they naturally buffer changes in climate, meaning less extreme changes. But while these land and ecosystems do naturally buffer these changes, they can't keep up with the rate of change we are currently seeing. And this is due to human impacts, such as greenhouse gas emissions, land clearing and land degradation, and highlights the importance of managing the land in ways that help improve land and ecosystem function, and therefore carbon storage. This is called carbon farming. But what actually is carbon? Well, on the screen here I've got a few little examples of what it might be. There's coal, which is just ancient stores of carbon. Plants and animals both exist as carbon. And then also even diamonds are pure carbon. But in general, carbon is a basic element, being the 4th most abundant in the universe, and is found in all living things that we know of. It's an important element for all biological processes, and actively moves through the air, plants, soil, water and oceans, and this is called the carbon cycle. And importantly, carbon is not inherently good or bad. It depends where that carbon is stored. And as you can see on the right there, that little picture is just showing that there are carbon molecules within our DNA. So if carbon's not inherently good or bad, how do we actually store more good carbon? Well, one way is through carbon farming. And well, what is that? It's any practice that increases carbon storage in the soil and vegetation, or reduces the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere. Therefore, carbon farming focuses on working with natural systems rather than just purely extracting resources. And it can apply across many different landscapes and ecosystems, including the rangelands, forests and wetlands. And here I'll just highlight that there's two main types of carbon farming. There's sequestration, which by definition is just removing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it within something. Usually this is in plant material or the soil. The next type is avoidance or reduction, and these types of carbon farming, they are either reducing the amount of greenhouse gases released into the environment, or they're just avoiding large emissions entirely. But importantly, both deliver the same benefit: less CO2 being in the atmosphere and reducing the impacts of climate change. So, how does carbon farming actually work? Well, like we said, carbon naturally moves through the environment, atmosphere, plants, soil and water, called the carbon cycle. And this starts with the process of photosynthesis, where plants capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and using sunlight, they turn that carbon dioxide, which was a gas, into sugars and carbohydrates that are a solid and stored within the plant material. This is the main natural process behind sequestration in carbon farming. On the screen here, I've just put a little diagram of a carbon cycle, but in the context of general land management in Australia. So up the top left there, you can see photosynthesis is taking CO2 and storing it within the plant material there. And some of that CO2 is breathed out by the plant, because all living organisms, they breathe just like we do. Some of those carbon compounds are stored within the tree or leached out into the soil as root exudates, or as leaf material that's dropped onto the surface. Alternatively, plant material is eaten by animals, and those animals eaten by other animals, and so on and so on. That's just passing carbon down the chain. Those animals as well, just like us, they breathe some of that carbon back into the atmosphere. And when those animals die, their bodies are decomposed and broken down, and the carbon, some of it, is released back into the soil and stored. And those decomposers, again, they breathe just like us, releasing that CO2 back into the atmosphere. And then also on the far right there, I've just got a little diagram of fire, showing that the fire is burning something that has carbon within it, probably some plant material. And that fire is then also releasing CO2 back into the atmosphere. Therefore, carbon farming aims to maximize carbon storage from photosynthesis while minimizing those carbon losses to the environment. And importantly, land management choices influence how much of that carbon is either stored or released. And not every action will be relevant or effective everywhere. For example, soil carbon storage potential is much lower in Western Australia than Queensland, and this is mainly due to rainfall. And the biggest influence on how much carbon a soil can store is how much rainfall the area gets, with higher rainfall areas having a much higher potential to store carbon. How do we use carbon farming as a tool to mitigate climate change? Well, obviously the biggest driver of climate change is the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And so our main goal of carbon farming is to reduce the amount of those greenhouse gases in or entering the atmosphere. And this helps stabilize the climate, protects biodiversity, and reduces the effects of climate change, and also supports adaptation by improving landscape resilience. So carbon farming, or sequestration, it complements but does not replace emissions reduction. Everyone has a role to play in emissions reduction, as no person will have a net zero or negative carbon footprint, where a carbon footprint, if you didn't know, is just a measure of a person's impact on the environment through their greenhouse gas emissions. So no person will have a negative or a net zero one at the moment. Every person has some form of emissions. And so these local actions can contribute to broader climate outcomes when everyone is playing their part. So why is it important? So country, communities, and long-term outcomes. Carbon farming has many benefits, including but not limited to reducing the effects of climate change by reducing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, supporting healthier landscapes and ecosystems, creates opportunities for diversified income streams, can support cultural land management practices, and encourages long-term thinking and environmental stewardship. So let's have a look quickly at some of the different types of carbon farming activities. Importantly, these are not carbon farming methods for undertaking a project. These are just activities that fall into a few different categories. With those categories broadly being vegetation, blue carbon, soil, livestock, and First Nations traditional ecological practices. So firstly, vegetation-based activities. These activities, they all use the vegetation to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and store it within their tissue. Examples of this include reforestation, which is just re-establishing forests after they'd been cut down. Afforestation, which is establishing completely new forests where there never was before. Urban forestry is just integrating vegetation within urban environments. And agroforestry, combining agriculture and forestry together. And these methods, they aim to maximize photosynthesis and growing time and minimize their carbon losses to the environment. Blue carbon activities. These are a little bit different. So these involve protecting, restoring, or managing coastal ecosystems to capture and store carbon within the plants and sediments. And so an example of this is reintroducing tidal flows, removing barriers for water flow, mangrove and seagrass restoration and protection. Soil carbon activities. So soil carbon farming involves managing the land in ways that increase the amount of carbon stored in soils by building organic matter and reducing carbon losses. Examples include cover cropping, reduced or no tillage farming, composting, rotational grazing, restoring degraded land, and many more. And importantly, many vegetation-based activities also increase soil carbon storage and are sometimes intertwined with each other. First Nations traditional ecological practices are a little bit different to the rest, as these are practices that are land and sea management approaches developed and practiced by Aboriginal peoples for tens of thousands of years and are grounded in deep cultural responsibility for country. And some examples of this include cultural burning, seasonal harvesting, seed saving, sacred site protection, and also many more. So how do our land management decisions actually affect our carbon outcomes? Well, obviously clearing land is bad for the environment, but exactly why? Well, when land is cleared, the plants that are being cut down start to decompose with the help of bacteria and fungi. Those decomposers breathe just like us. So as they break down that carbon in the tree material, they are releasing that carbon back into the atmosphere as they are breathing and eating it. And positive land management, it aims to build carbon slowly over time. And restoring and protecting land and ecosystems renews their ability to store carbon. However, carbon gains can be lost if management changes, and consistency and planning are critical for success. While bad land management practices lead to carbon losses and degraded land. So bad land management looks like excessive soil disturbance, clearing native species, not managing pests or allowing invasive species to dominate the land, and working against natural systems rather than with them. And these practices result in reduced soil health, loss of species, carbon losses, productivity losses, and less resilience to change. So one way that we can make good land management decisions is through carbon farming projects. So if you're looking at actually starting a carbon project to potentially earn some income, you need to take note that these projects need to follow approved methods, and projects often require long-term commitments and very clear governance, and not all land or activities are suitable for your carbon projects. The risks and obligations must be clearly understood before starting, including permanence obligations, which I'll talk about shortly. So So what are some of the risks associated with carbon farming? Obviously financial risks. The credit prices that you earn from carbon farming might fluctuate, or the upfront costs might outweigh your returns. Regulatory risks. There could be changes to policy, changes to method or markets that affect your viability long term. Natural event risks, such as fire, flood, disease, etc., can affect your carbon outcomes. And some cultural risks as well. So if land tenure, native title, or consent is unclear or mismanaged, projects can create conflict or delays. Some of the responsibilities associated with carbon farming. There's obviously a big management responsibility, as carbon farming projects often require ongoing monitoring, record keeping, and compliance. There's a legal and tenure responsibility, as projects require relevant and consent and rights to operate. And then there's permanence responsibilities, which are only for sequestration projects, which is a requirement for you to keep that carbon locked away, which will be explained a little bit more shortly. Some of the limits of carbon farming. Well, obviously not all land is suitable, and some land just has a low carbon potential. Not all methods might be right for your circumstances. And importantly, there's no replacement for emissions reduction. Method constraints such as location, activities, and measurement techniques might also limit what you can do. So what does a formal carbon farming project look like? Well, they need to follow approved methods to be eligible for earning credits, and the methodology documents are available online through the Clean Energy Regulator's website. These documents will outline exactly what activities you can undertake, how to measure your carbon gains, what obligations you have, and what the eligible area is for where you can actually do it. And if you want to earn carbon credits, you must follow these methods to the T. So let's have a look at quickly some of the different types of carbon farming projects that you might encounter. Agricultural based ones are obviously a big one, and these methods, they aim to reduce on-farm and land-based emissions. So some of the examples of this are the animal effluent management method, and this is just managing animal waste in a way that reduces its emissions. Estimating soil organic carbon, again, this goes back to soil carbon. This is just measuring how much carbon is being stored in your soils. And upcoming, there is the integrated farm and land management method, which is a new method coming for farmers, which will kind of integrate a bunch of different aspects of different carbon farming projects, making it easier for a farmer to account their on-farm emissions. Energy efficiency projects are another one. So these projects aim to reduce electrical and natural gas use. Some of the examples are the high efficiency commercial appliances method, industrial and commercial emissions reduction method, industrial equipment upgrade method, and the refrigeration and ventilation fans method. So you'll see these are all forms of emissions reduction, which is great. So landfill and waste-based methods. These methods, they upgrade or install new waste facilities to reduce their own emissions. And the methods here are the reducing methane emissions from landfill gas method 2025, so brand new, and the source separated organic waste method. Mining oil and gas, they also have their own method, which what they're doing is rerouting, flaring, or combusting leaked facility emissions. And so the method here is the carbon capture and storage method, where they are injecting greenhouse gases from oil and gas activities into underground spaces for permanent storage. And vegetation-based methods again. So these methods, they all function by removing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in plant tissue. Some of the ones here are the plantation forestry method, so just planting trees to capture carbon. The savanna fire management method, which is a little bit of a special method, and we'll actually talk about this in one of our later webinars, so be on the lookout for that. The tidal restoration of blue carbon ecosystems method. Again, blue carbon's in here, it's a little bit weird, but it's because in blue carbon ecosystems there is vegetation that is storing carbon. And again, this will come up more in our blue carbon webinar coming soon. And then the reforestation by environmental or mallee plantings method. And so again, vegetation-based methods have very specific obligations that the project operator must comply with. And one of those is permanence, which is a legal obligation to keep the stored carbon locked away for a set period of time after your carbon credits are issued. This is usually 25 or 100 years, depending on exactly what method you've chosen. And if you fail to comply with permanence obligations, you may be required to give back your credits that you've earned. So what are some of the benefits of carbon farming? Well, number one, obviously reducing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is one of the big positives, but also improving land and ecosystem health and function, increases in resilience to climate impacts, and supporting cultural and community outcomes, and also potentially creating new income streams through carbon credits. But what are carbon credits? Carbon credits are a form of currency earned through carbon farming activities and are also known as ACCUs, or Australian Carbon Credit Units, where each credit represents 1 tonne of carbon dioxide, either removed from the atmosphere or avoided entirely. And these credits are sold or cancelled to earn income. Who actually buys the carbon credits? Well, one example is large emitters, and these are factories, mining operations, and energy generators, and they must keep their greenhouse gas emissions below a set baseline level. But if they are unable for whatever reason to reduce their emissions below this target level, they must then buy and cancel credits. But other than large emitters, who else buys them? There's also voluntary buyers, such as businesses wanting to reduce their own carbon footprint, organizations that might report against climate or sustainability requirements, or even philanthropists that want to reduce their own footprint or make an impact, and many more. So carbon farming and nature repair, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. While carbon farming focuses on carbon outcomes, nature repair focuses on biodiversity and ecosystem health. And this is done through work like native vegetation planting, protection and repair. And some of the measures of your project success might be increased biodiversity, population numbers increasing, or better ecosystem health indicators. And as stated previously, all plants, animals and soil contain carbon. And so by repairing and restoring nature, we are actually also farming carbon. But stacking takes that a little bit further. Stacking is just combining a carbon farming and a nature repair project into one on the same land at the same time. So stacking must follow both approved methods, but also allows you to earn ACCUs and biodiversity certificates for the same work. Projects can provide carbon storage and biodiversity improvements at the same time. And a great example of this kind of work is the Gondwana Link project, where they're connecting habitats and restoring biodiversity across the southwest of Australia. But it's important to note that this is not actually a stacked project, but follows the same principles, as their work was started before this was introduced. Trust and consent, it makes or breaks projects. Decision makers, like Aboriginal elders and boards, shape how country is managed. So therefore, free, prior and informed consent, also known as FPIC, is essential for projects to succeed, where FPIC is just the right of Indigenous peoples to make voluntary, well-informed decisions about activities that affect their lands, waters, resources and rights. This is important as carbon projects can affect future land use options. If the carbon project has permanence obligations or restrictive activities, this could restrict self-determination and cultural practices, reduce future economic opportunities, and more. And these responsibilities extend into future generations. So let's have a look at some of the key takeaways for today's webinar. Well, firstly, carbon farming is about working with natural systems, not against them. Climate action and emissions reduction are shared responsibilities, and everyone has a role to play. A healthy country underpins successful carbon outcomes, and projects involve long-term planning and responsibilities. and carbon projects are just one solution to combating climate change. So what's next? Well, actually, our next webinar is the Nature Repair webinar, which will be released on the 17th of February. And this webinar will just go through the background knowledge, science, and systems behind nature repair in Australia. If you want to check out our other upcoming events and webinars and sign up, you can do that through the link on the screen here. And any queries or questions you have can be sent through the carbonOnCountry@abcau.com.au email. Thanks for attending webinar 1, which was an introduction to carbon farming. We hope to see you in our next webinar, which will be about nature repair.